The murder of XXXTentacion stands as a brutal warning for flaunting an opulent lifestyle when you can't escape the rap game. But more shocking than the story of how this young man was cut down before his prime are the circumstances that brought him onto a collision course with opportunistic killers. And now that the trial has finally ended, some 4 years after the shocking, senseless slaying, we can examine the steps that led to this situation in closer detail. So what happened that day? Who were these men that killed XXXTentacion? And could the whole thing have been avoided? Or was the SoundCloud rapper living on borrowed time? Let's answer these questions to do Jose Dwayne Ricardo, aka XXXTentacion, justice by looking at the life that led him to success and the missteps that brought him to death. XXX grew up in a Florida suburb that was voted the 8th most dangerous small city in America. It was a dog-eat-dog world. XXX got into plenty of fights as a kid, which meant he was conditioned to escalating situations, not diffusing them. Music had been the area where the young XXX shined, but he couldn't control his anger when a fellow choir member kept bugging him. School suspensions would soon follow whenever he kicked some kid in the mouth on the bus ride or got into scrapes on the playground. Whatever he was doing to attract trouble, he couldn't shake it. Even his own mother had to kick him out of the house. XXX went to live with his grandmother, who lived in a dangerous neighborhood. But given that his own father was a drug dealer and his mother was an exotic dancer in nightclubs, you can understand why moving out of his home might have been a good thing. Instead, things got worse. XXX would wind up in juvie after doing an armed robbery. He was now entering the world of crime and violence, so if something didn't pull him out of it soon, he would become another statistic on the street corner. Thankfully, young Detention helped him. It was behind bars that he met Stokely Clavon Goldborn, aka Ski Mask the Slump God. They bonded over their shared love for music and vowed to work together once each of them was out, and they stuck to their word. Starting off with a secondhand Yeti snowball mic, they started making music and sticking it up on SoundCloud. Initial success was slow, so XXX got a 9-to-5, selling electricity over the phone. He had the gift of gab after all, and he had a knack for doing accents to make himself sound, well, less like a guy who had committed armed robbery. But wearing a shirt and tie and sitting in a cubicle wasn't going to work forever. In time, a cult following grew behind XXX, which pulled him away from the straight and narrow life his office job promised him. But it was his sleeper hit, Look at Me, that got the attention of a wider audience a year later. He was en route to becoming a bona fide star. But even though music was supposed to be the thing that got them out of trouble, trouble had a way of finding him. He would go to jail again for robbery and assault with a deadly weapon, and after that, would do some time on a domestic violence charge against his ex-girlfriend. But the rap game is the only game where prison time helps your image. While he was behind bars, his music was blowing up, so now he was getting 6-figure offers from record labels. You can imagine how word spread around the yard that this kid was holding bank. He eventually settled on a 6-figure record deal to make his second studio album, entitled ? That's a lot of money for a 20-year-old, especially one who came from harsh beginnings. So as expected, he splashed out. He got a $1.4 million mansion to house his mother and new girlfriend, and splashed on designer clothes and cars. But whether he was flashing money to feel like a baller, or whether he was just too young to really know better, can't be known. What we do know was that his careless display of wealth caught the attention of the wrong men at the wrong time. The thing is, XXX knew he had enemies. He'd been on the streets, and he'd done prison time. That's why he never left the house alone. In fact, he had even increased security around him. But whether he was being paranoid or had good reason to fear an attack didn't matter. because this would be his last day on Earth. June 18th started as any normal day for XXX. He woke up at 6 a.m. for a short session of League of Legends. The early bird catches the worm, and then he spent the rest of the morning working on a beat track for his next song. But his mind started to wander to a new motorcycle. He had money burning a hole in his pocket from a recent $10 million record deal for his third studio album, so he wanted to visit a bike shop to get a new hog. He asked his girlfriend to come with him, but she was sick, so he FaceTimed his mother at 3:11 p.m. to ask her. However, his mother instead she would take his partner to the doctor. He was determined not to leave the house alone, so he recruited his step-uncle, and together they headed for Riva Motorsports. XXX put on a gold chain, grabbed his $2,000 Louis Vuitton bag, and jumped into his $150,000 BMW. The guy was broadcasting more wealth than a Donald Trump television channel. But it was his next decision that proved fatal. En route, he stopped at a Bank of America outlet to withdraw cash. How much money do you need to buy a motorbike up front? Apparently, it's $50,000. He placed all those crisp Benjamin Franklins into his Louis Vuitton bag. But who should see this young man carrying so much cash? None other than the four men previously mentioned: Michael Boatwright, Trayvon Newsom, Robert Allen, and Dietrich Williams. They didn't know XXX personally. They might not have heard of his career, but they would be the ones to end both his musical legacy and his life. CCTV from inside the motorbike shop showed a Dodge Journey pull into the parking lot just 10 minutes after XXX arrived. While XXX spoke with staff and checked out bikes, Allen and Williams entered the shop to snoop around, while Boatwright and Newsom waited outside for the signal. At 3:55 p.m., just under an hour of when he last spoke to his family on the phone, XXX left the shop. But as soon as his BMW turned to pull out of the parking lot, the four men pounced. A Dodge Journey blocked in XXX's car as he was leaving a motorcycle dealership, and two masked men jumped out. The two robbers struggled with XXX for his bag and gold chain, but there was a moment where XXX looked at the gunman. All the gunman had to do was turn around and walk away. But perhaps fearing XXX had recognized them from earlier, or perhaps wanting to prove himself, he instead fired point blank. XXX had been shot just 1 minute after leaving the store. Though medical services would do their best to save him, XXX was pronounced dead at 4:51 p.m. Fans started pouring out their grief and love for this rap star while the police investigation got underway. In the end, they didn't have to look hard to find the culprits. A few hours after the shooting, Williams filmed a video of himself dancing around with $100 bills. There was also a paper trail proving he had spent $800 on designer clothes. Boatwright had also spent $400 on clothing and shoes a couple of weeks later. And none of the four men could account for how their broke butts suddenly had so much cash. Shell casings from the crime scene were linked to the shooter's gun, but perhaps the most damning evidence was the CCTV video of the robbers buying their masks from the very shop that XXX was last in. Not exactly criminal masterminds. The ensuing prosecution would take years to reach a verdict. In the meantime, XXX's music skyrocketed. Sales of his first album shot up 9,000%, and his second album, saw a 41,306% sales increase, despite only releasing in March of the same year. When the four men did go on trial, they pleaded not guilty, claiming that the lack of DNA evidence proved they weren't there. However, CCTV plus the vehicle's Bluetooth connections to their phones proved otherwise. They even tried to pin it on Drake of all people, saying the police failed to investigate a beef between XXX and a man who has a reputation for crying over ex-girlfriends. In the end, 3 of the men would be found guilty for first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, including the shooter, Boatwright, who wore a snappy turtleneck to court. One of the men, Robert Allen, pleaded guilty to second degree a year earlier in exchange for testifying against his 3 accomplices. Naturally, their defense lawyers saw this as him trying to dodge a life sentence by lying on the stand. So it's fitting that a tragedy brought on by one man's image would end with one of the killers throwing his friends under the bus to save his. Perhaps things might have been different if XXX hadn't withdrawn so much money. Or perhaps his flaunting of wealth would inevitably shorten his lifespan. Which do you think it is? Leave your theory in the comments below. Share this with a rap fan and leave a like if you want us to cover more celebrity deaths. As always, hit subscribe and we'll see you soon.